In history into a tailspin.
2 American hostages came back from Lebanon this year. Father Lawrence Martinjenko was released in July, not knowing why he was set free. But in November, shortly after David Jacobson came home, the world would learn what price the U.S. had paid. President Reagan sold weapons to Iran, and in the process, he sacrificed the credibility of his administration.
We did not, repeat, did not trade weapons or anything else for hostages, nor will we.
At first, critics accused Reagan of giving in to terrorist blackmail. Then the story took a bizarre turn. Attorney General Edwin Meese revealed that some of the profits of the arms sale to Iran had been used to fund the Contra rebels in Nicaragua. And Meese said the entire operation was run by a relatively low-level member of the National Security Council, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North.
And I don't think there is another person in America that wants to tell this story as much as I do, sir.
But North did not tell his story. When Congress began looking into the scandal, North and his boss, Vice Admiral John Poindexter, took the Fifth Amendment. Other witnesses were more willing to talk, but they knew less about the whole affair.
My role in that was zero.
In closed hearings, CIA Director William Casey said he did not know much about it either. But before he was able to testify again, Casey was hospitalized with a brain tumor. White House Chief of Staff Donald Regan and Attorney General Meese both said they believed the president had nothing to do with the Contra connection. But that did not necessarily let the president off the hook.
The president has a dual problem. One, he doesn't have the information that everyone expects him to have. And secondly, he needs it because he needs to run this country.
President Reagan fired North, accepted Poindexter's resignation, and appointed a 3-man commission to investigate the National Security Council. He also called for an independent counsel to look into the affair. Former federal judge Lawrence Walsh was chosen for the job. Congressional leaders picked 2 select committees to conduct separate investigations. The president said he wanted everything out in the open, but opinion polls showed fewer and fewer Americans believed him. European allies did not know what to believe either, despite the best efforts of the president's men to reassure them that American policies were firm. Of all the allies, only the Israelis were not surprised by the disclosure of arms shipments to Iran. That's because those shipments were funneled through Israel via a complex international network of private arms dealers, Swiss bank accounts, and retired American generals. And the ultimate beneficiaries were supposed to be the Contras. Until Congress voted to give them another $100 million this year, the Contras had to rely on other funds for their war against the Nicaraguan government. Those funds paid for operations like the plane that was shot down in October with a cargo of weapons for the rebels. Eugene Hassenfuss survived the crash. The Nicaraguans convicted Hassenfuss of terrorism, sentenced him to 30 years, then pardoned him and sent him home. Now there is another self-styled American mercenary in prison in Nicaragua, Sam Hall, brother of Ohio Congressman Tony Hall. The fly-by-night character of both the Hall and Hassenfuss operations have given Congress second thoughts about its support for America's not-so-secret war in Nicaragua. And now that Congress has found out the war was partly paid for by the sale of arms to Iran, the Contras may lose what little support they have left. For the Year in Review, I'm Susan Lasovich.
While the White House was selling arms to Iran, it dealt much differently with other countries accused of sponsoring terrorism. Earlier in the year, the prime suspect was Libya, and the Reagan administration took a hard line.
Libya was suspected in the airport massacres at Rome and Vienna 1 year ago. 20 people died. Libya was suspected again in the bombing of a West Berlin discotheque in April. More than 200 people were injured, including more than 60 Americans. So when the U.S. decided to retaliate, Libya was the obvious target. In a nighttime raid that lasted only 11 minutes, American planes bombed military airfields, terrorist training bases, and the command post of Libya's leader, Muammar Gaddafi.
He counted on America to be passive. He counted wrong.
One American plane was lost in the raid. Pieces of it later washed ashore. Libya claims 40 people were killed in the raid. The victims were buried as martyrs. In Lebanon, 4 hostages were killed in retaliation for the American attack. One of them was an American, Peter Kilbourne. The other 3 were British. Britain's Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, was the only European ally who openly supported the American raid on Libya. Still, other European countries joined Britain in kicking out Libyan students and diplomats suspected of involvement in terrorist activities. But Libya was not the only suspected sponsor of terrorism. Britain uncovered evidence that Syria was involved in a plot to blow up an El Al plane in London. Jordanian Nezar Hindawi was convicted of the crime. The Syrian ambassador was expelled, and Britain broke off relations. Not so long after that, Hindawi's brother was convicted of blowing up an office in West Berlin. Syria was accused of providing the explosives, and West Germany kicked out a number of Syrian diplomats. Other European countries were urged to take sanctions against Syria, but France, for one, was reluctant. Paris had been rocked by a series of bombings in September, and the French hoped Syria would help them put an end to the violence. Lebanese terrorists were suspected but never caught. Lebanese or Palestinian terrorists were also implicated in a number of other attacks around the world this year. In September, a Pan Am flight was hijacked in Pakistan. The ordeal came to a bloody end when Pakistani commandos stormed the plane. 21 people died in a storm of gunfire and grenades. A bomb ripped open the side of a TWA plane on its way to Athens. 4 American passengers were sucked out of the plane and fell to their deaths. Arab gunmen stormed a synagogue in Istanbul and opened fire on the worshippers. 21 people were killed. 2 Arabs threw grenades into a crowd near Jerusalem's Wailing Wall. 70 people were wounded. For that and for other attacks on the Israelis during the year, Israel retaliated with several bombing raids on Palestinian bases in Lebanon. The Palestinians also came under attack this year from the Shiite Muslim militia in Lebanon. And it is from the rubble of those battered camps that sponsors of terrorism find many of their raw recruits. For the Year in Review, I'm Patrick Emery.
Next on the Year in Review, a woman of courage and determination leads her country back to democracy.
And the people of another nation struggle to set themselves free. This was a dramatic year of transition in the Philippines. A soft-spoken Filipino housewife emerged to lead a skillful revolution against a rich and powerful dictator.
At the end of last year, Ferdinand Marcos was so confident of his power that he declared snap presidential elections. The opposition candidate was a long shot, Corazon Aquino, who described herself as just a housewife. But she was the widow of the Philippines' most popular opposition leader, Benigno Aquino. He had been assassinated in 1983, apparently by the Marcos government. Benigno's mourners became Corazon's supporters. She took the moral high ground during her campaign, and by the time it was over, she was drawing millions of people to her rallies. Marcos drew large crowds too, but his campaign had been hurt by rumors of ill health and charges of massive corruption. Still, Marcos predicted an easy victory, and indeed was declared the winner by the National Assembly. But international observers said the Marcos camp had bought votes and fixed the numbers. The Aquino camp set up its own vote-counting operation, which declared her the winner, and Corazon called for a nationwide strike until Marcos stepped down. A military mutiny brought the standoff to a dramatic end. Marcos's defense minister and chief of staff seized control of the military headquarters in Manila and demanded that Marcos resign.
I will not resign.
The president threatened to squash the rebellion by force, but his troops were blocked by an extraordinary display of what became known as people power. By the time Marcos was inaugurated, he didn't even have enough power to keep his ceremony on the air. Then, on a plane provided by the United States, he and his entourage fled to exile in Hawaii. A jubilant crowd burst into the presidential palace and saw for the first time the opulence of the Marcos family. After becoming president, Aquino quickly set about trying to get back billions of dollars that Marcos is accused of stealing from the country. She also moved to restore civil rights, releasing hundreds of political prisoners, including several leaders of the outlawed Communist Party. That was her first controversial move. Next, she dissolved the National Assembly and assumed legislative powers to make way for a new constitution and general elections next year. That move fueled the first of many protests against her government, protests that some said were orchestrated by ex-President Marcos. His former running mate tried and failed to proclaim himself president, but Aquino faced a far more serious challenge 4 months later from her defense minister, Juan Ponce Enrile. He demanded she take a tougher line against communism. Eventually, Aquino fired Enrile after discovering he planned a coup against her government. She reshuffled her cabinet and negotiated a ceasefire with the communist rebels. Aquino